Good afternoon, everybody. We still have people coming in, but I want to start the presentation. It's just past 1:30, and for those of you who've known me for a while, you know that I like to start on time and end on time. So it's 1:30. Welcome to the discussion regarding the Food Safety Reform Act. I'm Peter Quinter. I'm the partner in charge of the Customs and International Trade Department at the law firm Becker and Poliakoff. The only law firm, I think, that's represented at the show. Come out and see us at booth 178. I have the pleasure to introduce, just briefly, three other panelists today. Domenic J Veneziano, Director of the Import Operations and Policy Branch, FDA, just outside Washington, D.C. in Rockville, Maryland. Anybody have contact with the FDA? A lot of you, okay. What we're going to do, by the way, with the four speakers, hold your questions till the end. We like questions. We're going to keep the presentation short so we can have a lot of questions at the end of the four speakers. So following Domenic will be myself. After me, Dean Leaman. Dean is the Director of Business Development for ABC Research Inc., also booth 178. The last and best speaker, of course, is the CEO of Pescanova Inc. Pescanova is one of the biggest display companies downstairs. If you haven't seen them, I don't know which booth it is. It must be 3 or 4 different booth sizes. But Domingo Moreira is the CEO of Pescanova Inc., based in Miami, Florida. So without further ado, please welcome. Let's have the first speaker. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. As Peter mentioned, it's a pleasure for me to be here and talk to you all today about the Food Safety Modernization Act. I was going to get into a little bit of the progress of our ORA's Import Operations Strategic Plan, but I think I'm going to try to keep it quiet, and if you have any questions related to that, I'll take questions. I'll also answer questions about import operations in general. So if you have questions related to anything other than the Food Safety Modernization Act, I'm happy to address any of those concerns as well. As you all know by now, Congress passed the Food Safety Modernization Act with overwhelming bipartisan majority, and on January 4th of 2011, the President signed the law into effect. What we're going to talk about today is the public health need, how big is the problem related to foodborne illnesses. We'll talk about the challenges and factors in our food supply and what food safety needs spurred the law and why we needed it and why there was such a big push both within the industry as well as the agencies. Then we'll talk about how the provisions of the law work together to make our food safety program a lot stronger than it currently is. And then finally, we'll talk about the implementation process and all the work that has been gone into, that's been done. The foodborne illness is a significant burden to our country. 48 Americans get sick every year due to foodborne illnesses, roughly 1 out of 6 people. 128,000 of those individuals will get hospitalized, and 3,000 of them will die as a result of it. Certain populations, as most of you probably know, are more susceptible to it: infants, children, pregnant women, and the elderly. And it's a lot bigger than just a stomach ache or getting sick. It has long-term effects in terms of arthritis and kidney damage. Why is the law needed? Today's food safety system must meet the demands of today's supplies. 15% of the food supply in the United States comes from overseas. 75% of the seafood is imported. 20% of vegetables are imported, and 50% of fruit is imported into the country. Our food supply is more technically advanced and complex. Just think of all the choices that you currently make when you go to the grocery stores and have those options. Strawberries in February is always the analogy that people have said in the past. We want our supplies, we want them all year round, and we have to make provisions in order to get them into the country. And as our population changes, those risks continue to grow. Currently, about 30% of individuals are especially at risk for foodborne illnesses. Talking a little bit, just getting into the Food Safety Modernization Act. There's 4 major themes associated with it: prevention, inspection, compliance and response, import safety, which is the main area that we have, and enhanced partnerships. These four components working together make up a safer and better food supply chain. And we'll talk about the import safeties and all the provisions associated with them and where the agency is going in terms of implementing that process. We usually talk about historically, and you always hear in papers and the articles that the agency usually only examines 1% of the entries coming into the country for everything we regulate. Food specifically, it's usually about 2% that we have done over the past years. This law changes all of that. This law is unprecedented because it gives us the authority to take more actions and places the responsibility on the importers rather than on the agency. Our resources of doing and sampling in the past has always been that we would start products as they come along, we would sample them, examine them, have them tested, and then take the appropriate action after the fact. This new law changes and puts the onus all throughout the entire supply chain, starting at prevention, starting at the point where the foreign governments and the foreign manufacturers have to put in place preventions. And it requires that the importers validate that those preventive measures are put in place. Talking a little bit about each of the steps, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, and as Peter mentioned, we encourage the questions. We want you to ask the questions related to each one of these, and we can get a little bit more specific. There are certain things I can say and certain things I can't say because it is still fresh in everyone's mind of how we implement these laws. We have to interpret what the meaning of Congress was as they wrote them, and we'll talk a little bit about them as we go through. Section 301 of the Act talks about Foreign Supply Verification Program. This requires importers to verify their suppliers use risk-based prevention controls that provide same level of protection as the U.S. requirements. This means that an importer is going to have to certify to the agency that everything has been in place based upon, I believe it's Section 418 of the Act, meaning do they have HACCP controls in place? How are they going to react to recalls? How are they going to get things in? Have they tested? Do they have a program that is going to ensure the safety of the food that's being manufactured at that location? Section 302 talks about the Voluntary Qualified Importer Program. This is going to allow the expedited products or products to be expedited through our systems if certain requirements are being met, and we're still working on that. We're also working on what does it mean by to be expedited. I know that the industry is going to have one area in terms of meaning you're not going to stop products, you're going to allow them to go in based on the fact that you voluntarily participated in this program. But there's a lot of things that need to be built in. One is, what benefits do you want? Having been part of the import operations for a very long time and working with other voluntary programs like the CT-PAT for customs or ISA, one of the big complaints we had is there's not enough benefits for the industry. And if it's being held up or if it's being expedited through customs, why is FDA stopping product? That doesn't help us because it's not expediting anything. So we're going to be working with customs and the other agencies and working with the industry to try to build in both the benefits to you as well as the benefits to the agency to make sure that we're doing it correctly. Certification of high-risk food imports. We have the discretion to authorize and require assurance of compliance of high-risk foods. So you're going to have to certify, along with, once we identify what those high-risk commodities are, that those products are in compliance with the laws and the regulations of the agency. How this is going to be done, we can talk a little bit about that, and I'm happy to address some of it, but we right now don't know. We know that we're going to have to receive certificates, and we don't know if it's going to be on a lot-by-lot basis or is it going to be based upon a manufacturer. How are we going to receive them? How are we going to validate them? That entire process we're kind of working through. Section 304 talks about prior notice of imported food shipments. This has to do with requiring prior refusals in any other country. So right now we're currently building our systems to receive, as part of the prior notice submission, any refusal from another country. So as brokers and importers submit the information, they're going to have to provide that information to us as well. That if it ever got refused from another country, they have to notify us on why the refusal and the country itself. Capacity building, FDA mandate to work with foreign governments to build food safety capacities. We are working with countries around the world to develop standards and look at their systems as well as our own systems to make sure that we have the capacity overseas as well as in the United States for equivalency, per se, in terms of moving forward and making sure that the standards, and we can use the work that they're doing to protect what's coming into the country. Inspection of foreign food facilities. This is a big problem that we've had in the past. It didn't make sense to anyone where if someone refused an inspection overseas, we still needed to allow those products into the country. To do foreign inspections takes a lot of coordination and a lot of time to set up in terms of getting the approvals and ahead of time, getting out there, and it's very expensive. So this is the first time we had the capability where if we get delayed that request and or get refused a request, there is now an appearance of a violation where it says your facility is out, and we can issue an import alert based upon that. In order to get off that import alert, you would have to allow the agency or a third party to go in and do the inspection to demonstrate that you're in compliance with the laws and the regulations that we oversee. And then finally, targeting of inspection resources. Increase inspections both foreign and domestic. The law states that that in FY 2011 we have to conduct 600 inspections, double it the next year for the next 5 years. That means in 5 years we have to do 19,200 inspections overseas alone. I could tell you right now that we're not going to do it. We don't have the resources to do that. So we'll talk a little later about how we're building that capacity for other governments, how we're working on coalition and working with foreign agencies to accomplish that 19,200. Section 707 talks about accreditation of third-party auditors. This goes to product-specific requirements, and it's also going to be a requirement for the voluntary qualified importer program. I have always been asked, why can't we sample products overseas, show that it's negative, and then when it comes in, just allow it to be released into commerce based upon that? There's a lot of issues that surrounding that operationally. For one, and the biggest, is that there is no limitation. You have currently the ability to test products overseas before they come in. The problem comes that we have to validate that what got sampled is the same product that came into the country, and that's very hard to do. This is going to certify and allow third party to do that, and we have to work on, the agency has to work on how are we going to be able to do this operationally. So you have to take what's written in the law, make sure we have the capability operationally to move it forward. Foreign offices of the Food and Drug Administration establish offices of foreign countries to provide assistance. This has already been going on. We have offices in Latin America, we have it in China, we have it in India, we have it in Mexico City, and these offices that we have are helping other government agencies to create those standards and better communicate on things, and also give us intelligence about what actions might be happening in those areas. So if we know, and you take a melamine scenario that happened in 2008, if we knew of that scenario or that history, that people within the country were using or spiking products to increase the protein levels, that information could have been given to us probably a little earlier, and maybe we could have combated that or tried to test for certain levels. We're there now. We're using the intelligence that we currently have. We're in total communication with the offices. Those offices are working with our foreign counterparts to try to increase the knowledge of how we get products into the country and the manufacturing practices within that country itself. Smuggling foods in coordination with DHS, the Homeland Security, identify and prevent entry of smuggled food. Very hard to do. If it's smuggled, it's being hidden, and we're not being notified, and it's not in any declaration. CBP's definition is such that, not notifying us of products, that they're going to actually find something that is hidden. So to do that is kind of difficult. They're working on how to do that, and they're trying to identify what actions can lead to or increase the risk of those individuals that might smuggle food. What's the role of the third-party certification program? It's just a way of importers to obtain necessary assurance to meet their obligations for the foreign supplier verification program. It's necessary for the participation in the voluntary qualified importer program, or it's just one option. I believe that when we create it, it's going to be other options of meeting the requirements of the VQIP program, and can be required to FDA to accompany high-risk foods. So if it's a high-risk food and you have it tested overseas, we're going to have a COA, certificate of analysis, or some other method of bringing that food in and looking at it. Talked about partnership early. The Food Safety Modernization Act explicitly recognizes that all food safety agencies and industry need to work together to do this. One of the things we realize is this problem is so big that the agency can't do it alone. It's going to take the cooperation of not only Food and Drug, but also all the other government agencies working together, as well as the industry. And it's the industry's responsibility as well to protect the food supply. And there has to be ways to not only combat or deter bad actors, but we also have to make sure that we're working together to get it right. This works with working with CBP, working with USDA, working with Fish and Wildlife, all areas of the governments. We're also working on trade agreements. We can't forget the fact that we have to be in compliance with international agreements, explicit notes for that FSMA must be consistent with our World Trade Organizations. So at every stage along the way, we're always checking ourselves to make sure we're not in, we're meeting those requirements, and we have the experts at the table with us to make sure that we're doing things appropriately. Implementation and timeline. We've had a lot of experience already on preventive controls. We've done it with seafood and juice related to HACCP domestically. We are now going to implement it in the foreign arena as well, and create and develop those preventive controls in order to be put in place. We have an implementation process in place that's made up of an executive team. It's comprised of a chief of implementation. It has 6 team leaders and over 20 work groups that are working to implement all of these provisions. And again, we're working at preventive controls. I talked a little bit about all the work that we've already done. The produce safety, we're in the process of implementing the produce safety rule. New import strategies, we've started back in 2009 an import operations strategic plan, and we're in the process of implementing that plan right before the Food Safety Modernization Act got signed. So we're in that process, and that's continuing to move forward. That is already, when we designed that, had Food Safety Modernization Act in mind. So whether it got passed or it didn't get passed, we were already in position to actually move a lot of these initiatives forward. And then finally, the federal-state integration we're working with, as well as new inspectional programs. The one thing that I have to say is that our challenge is great. We have over 50 new rules and guidances that have to be submitted, as well as reports have to be sent to Congress within a 3-year period. We have very, very tight deadlines, which you'll see when we talk about our priorities. And the changes won't happen overnight. We understand that it's going to take a little time to implement all of these new rules, the guidances that you all need to get things right, as well as operationally to build the IT systems and have it done. And then lastly, you see resources. The law was written, but the laws didn't come with any funding, and it didn't come with any resources associated with them. So we realize that we have to work closely with all our, in a coalition to actually get this and do it and implement it in the correct manner. And the one thing that we are cognizant of is the fact that the resources have to be identified. We have to identify how many resources we're going to need, and we need to report that back out to Congress to let them know what we can do and what we can't do based upon the resources that we currently have. The implementation approach, coalition needed, transparency of the priority. The laws of the government make it a little difficult in terms of what we can say and what we can't say. It is an initiative, and it is a very high priority of the agency to be transparent on this process. We want to make it open to the public, and in fact, starting on March 29th, 30th, and 31st, there's a Federal Register out there talking about a public hearing that's being held in the D.C. area. Anyone can go to that and ask questions both of the industry as well as the government, and it's open to the public. we are working with the industry and we're bringing them in. The other thing is we wanted to engage our stakeholders totally differently. We're bringing them at the table and we're asking them how they see the law and what they think can work. So we want to implement things, but we want to implement it that's going to work operationally. So we're bringing people together and we're talking with them to try to get their thoughts, their ideas on what they're seeing about the law as well. Our priorities, prevention, we talked about mandatory prevention. We have an 18-month requirement to get the Federal Register out. Produce safety standards, we have a 2-year requirement. Intentional contamination, 18-month. Inspection, compliance and response. Administrative detention, this allows us to put a hold on things if we have a concern domestically. We already have that in place for imports coming in because we can stop whatever we want based upon the appearance of a violation. However, domestically, now it allows us to almost do an injunction on the spot, and it gives us 30 days to get organized. Recalls, we have that capability now, but the one thing that we understand is, although we can do it, we try not to. We try to work with the industry to try to convince them or to work with them to say there is a public health need, this product needs to be recalled. Suspension of registration, 180 days. It's a very quick time period to figure it out. We have to register people first. We have to figure out systems to capture that registration and then have the capability of suspending them. And then imports foreign supplier verification program. That guidance and that Federal Register needs to be completed in 1 year. And the problem with that, I mean, it's pretty easy to write a regulation, but the regulation or the operations has to guide the Federal Register. So we have to have a good understanding of how we're going to operate before we can put in place a Federal Register and provide guidance to the field. Accredited third-party certification program and certification program for high-risk foods. For more information, there's the websites there. It's constantly being updated. I ask that you go to those the websites. The information related to presentations will be put there. Information related to public hearings or any communication that we want to put out will be found at those websites. With that, thank you very much, and I look forward to all of your questions. Thanks.
Thank you. You're welcome. Help me out. Put it over the next one. Yeah, let's see. Which one's mine? Okay. All of that new law has to be implemented next 2 years. That's a heck of a responsibility. So. How many people here are from the New England area? Raise your hands. All right. So I see you cheated. Both of us are from, when people ask where you're from, we both say Boston. Now, which one of us do you think is closer to the city of Boston? Me or who? Huh? It's a test. The answer will be provided at the end. So, but I'm from Wellesley, Mass, 13 miles west. This gentleman's, 2 or 3 miles from here. 4 miles from here. Okay. All right. Let's go full frame. Okay. All right, let's talk about the awesome responsibilities of the FDA. FDA, we're talking about so far food, and particularly seafood. But as you can see, FDA examines all kinds of merchandise, all kinds of regulated products. The most regulated product being food. And if there was a subset of that, the most regulated product within the subset of food is, of course, seafood. Look at that. 20 million import lines of food, devices, etc. That's a heck of a lot of cargo to go through. That's why FDA examines only 2% of the food generally in the United States. From 130,000 importers, from 150 countries around the world. As I said, the responsibility of the FDA is immense. Thank God that the Food Safety Reform Law went into effect in January, signed by President Obama. We look forward to the actual regulations. The current commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Margaret Hamburg, has stated last year, and she's followed this up, believe me, I have made improving the scientific accuracy and usefulness of food labeling one of my priorities. So what is food labeling? I guess the opposite of that could be seafood fraud for this purpose. What are the 4 most common types of seafood fraud? They're identified there. There's a whole bunch of range of other allegations of seafood fraud by the FDA, U.S. Customs, Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, against seafood companies, especially importers. But these are the most common. These are the ones you want to avoid, because these are the ones the FDA is looking at the most. All right, so what we're just going to talk about in the next 10 or 15 minutes of my presentation, a little bit about the FDA laws and regulations, a lot about the FDA import process. Between me and Dean, we're going to take you through what is involved in getting the cargo from overseas through U.S. Customs, FDA, through using your customs broker into your importer and distributed therefore. What happens when the FDA does say, hey, we want to look at that product, we want to detain it without physically examining it or even looking at it, they want to detain it. And maybe even want to refuse it, which means it gets to be destroyed or exported. What happens if your company overseas is under an import alert? So that product from your company may not easily enter the United States. How do you get off that import alert list? What does it mean, detention without physical examination? And of course, what is a U.S. Customs penalty or liquidated damage claim for failure to redeliver or destroy or export your refused merchandise? And how do you mitigate or get those penalties canceled? Okay, so we got from Domenic some of the statistics. 15 to 20% of the U.S. food supply is imported. That percentage is growing. Produce, look at that, 45% of fresh fruits. And of course, when it comes to seafood, why are we all here? Because seafood is a major part of the U.S. food supply, and it's a growing part of it. Went from 50% to more than 75%. 75%, isn't that amazing? 75% of the seafood that we eat comes from overseas. Okay, there's two basic terms that you should hear, or you will hear, when you're talking to an FDA compliance officer regarding your imported food products. One is adulterated. There's something wrong with your food. The legal definition is there. It could be a substance other than the food product that's associated with what you're bringing in. It contains an added poisonous or a deleterious substance, has filth, putrid, etc. Not good things. What's the other reason the FDA tends to stop, detain, just refuse your merchandise from overseas? It's misbranded. It's not what it's supposed to be. Happens all the time. And you know it more than I do. I end up representing those companies that don't necessarily get away with it. So, false advertising. False anything regarding the product. False country of origin. False description of the fish is, of course, common. The weight, of course, is another one that's common. Okay, so we'll talk about the detention process. What does the law say? Does the law say the cargo has to go from another country and be seen physically by the eyes of an FDA officer before the FDA can just refuse it and say, no, we don't want it coming in, before they detain it or hold it? No. They can just look at the computer and say, you know what, we don't like that product because it comes from this area of this country, and we know there's a history of problems for that particular item. So without any physical review of an imported item, FDA puts it on a hold. And you as the importer or the customs broker know it right away electronically. When the cargo is put on hold, a written notice will be issued to the importer and the broker. It's called a notice of FDA action. And that notice will state the legal reason why it's being held, and I talked about adulterated or misbranded. It'll tell you why it's adulterated or misbranded. It'll tell you where the cargo is being held. It'll tell you you have a certain number of days to correct the problem. It'll also tell you, and this is the most important part, you have usually 10 days to make a presentation to the FDA. The FDA is giving you this chance to say, hey, Mr. Quinter, tell us why we should allow this merchandise into the United States, why we are wrong, it's not misbranded or it's not adulterated. That's your opportunity to telephonically call the FDA, to send them fax, email them, call them, some information that your product is fine. And we're going to talk about Dean's aspect in a minute. When FDA suspects that there's something wrong with your cargo, you can get a private lab to test it, prove there's nothing wrong with it, and of course get it released. I like to do, of course in Miami, face-to-face meetings with a compliance officer. And most people don't even take advantage of that. So I want to make sure you know about that. If your product is being held or detained because it's subject to an import alert, the import alert number will be on the notice. And then you can look up the import alert number on the FDA website, figure out from there what you need to do. Because a lot of times the FDA doesn't tell you what to do. It just says, your cargo's on hold. It's adulterated, it's got some filth in it. Now what do? You got $100,000 of seafood sitting at the port. If it's fresh, it's even worse. You got to really move on that. Okay, here's the part we're going to talk about Dean from ABC Research, which is a food sampling company.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. We all have, I'm guessing, been in the seafood industry for quite some time, and I know that you all have familiarity with the FDA and some of their processes. their availability, their policies don't always work well with what we're trying to accomplish, and that's get the product and into the customer. So we all have to work together. You hear the task that the FDA has, and we sometimes look at them as though they are the evil organization, but the truth of the matter is they're doing the best they can with the resources that they have, and unless we want our taxes to go a whole lot higher, we're probably not going to get things done a whole lot faster. But when things do happen, there are procedures that we have to follow. So we're talking about a product. Your product is detained, and I don't know how many of you are importers, how many of you are processors, how many of you are actual suppliers to the U.S. With this new safety law, there's going to be a lot of changes. But as it pertains to this slide, we're talking about, let's say your product is detained for an import alert, 131, 161, 131. 131 is the antibiotics. You have to have a procedure in place, we as a lab do, or you as an importer do, for getting your product sampled, and you cannot do it yourself. I get calls all the time, can I just send you samples? The answer is no, you can't. You have to have a third-party sampler collect samples for you, or you have to have an FDA agent present to witness your pulling of the samples. When we send this paperwork into the FDA, we have a very large packet that has to go into the FDA after we do an analysis for a detained product. They want to see that you didn't just pull this product yourself, because they frankly don't trust you. So what happens is you can contact a private laboratory like ourselves, and we can either hire a third-party sampler, which we do all around the country, or you can ask the FDA compliance officer if they could send somebody to your facility to witness the samples being pulled. Yeah, well, yeah, with the resources they have, it's going to be difficult to do. This is just a quick list of what's required by the FDA in the report packet that we send them, along with the analysis of if you're being held for salmonella. We do an analysis for salmonella, but they want to see the bill of lading, the packing list, commercial invoice, warehouse tally, which is just your inventory, and the notice of action as it relates to the particular product. If any of these are missing, that packet could get rejected by the FDA, or they'll call and ask for you to send it, and it's just going to hold you up. So the important part is if you're working with a third-party lab, that they understand what the FDA is going to be looking for in their review process. We send packets to the compliance officer, but also to the laboratory that's going to review our analysis. This is probably yours, but we'll talk about chain of custody. That's one of the important parts of the third-party sampler. You have to show that you have given your product to a sampling company. They're going to sign a piece of paper showing that they've now taken control of it. They're going to send it to the laboratory via FedEx, or however it's going to happen, and it's being received. The chain of custody needs to be shown in the packet to the FDA so that this product is not lost or it's not been misrepresented to the entry. This talks a little bit about the FDA is required to take a look at the analysis of the product that you've sent in. They're going to scrutinize the third party's procedures and how third-party laboratories' procedures, and they have a methodology that they have to follow. The FDA is aware of it. We have to follow that procedure, and that's what they're looking for. Technical validity, that's a big part of it. There's so much that goes into these third-party testing, because they want to know that our equipment is calibrated, they want to know that our people are trained, and they want to know that we are actually conducting good science. This is real boring stuff, but this is the kind of stuff that you have to be aware of, because at the end of the day, the importer holds full responsibility for what the third-party laboratory's report says. So you actually have to sign off on that, stating that, yes, you have qualified the laboratory yourself as an importer, and that this is actually representing what it is you do with your product. So as you can see here that it's the importer, at the very last line, the importer bears the responsibility and consequence of any inadequacy by the laboratory. There are, as you know, many ports in the United States. If you're bringing in things into New York or Los Angeles or Miami, Houston, the FDA has a kind of a difficult time taking regulatory issues and making them consistent every time, all the time. And districts do have their, the choice to make determinations on their own. Some people, you'll hear people say, I have a very easy time getting things into New York, but I can't get anything into LA. I get stopped every time. This new food safety law is going to stop that. The communication between all of the ports is going to be much better than it was and much more stringent than it was. There's not going to be this port shopping anymore, which a lot of people still try to do. So what it says here is the agencies meaning the different ports, can make a case-by-case determination of whether they're going to stop your product, or it could be the foreign supplier, it could be the actual one particular shipment or one type of product from a supplier. So it varies, and that's what makes it difficult for all of us to try to determine, or all of you, to determine whether or not your product is going to be detained when it gets here. This is just a quick kind of list of what we find is found in the seafood business. Antibiotics, salmonella, lead. If you are in the business, you've probably seen this at one time or another, where your product has been held up for these things. And most all of these are related to a particular import alert. Again, just a quick checklist of the documents required. Notice of action, bill of lading, commercial invoice, packing list, customs form 3461. Not a lot of people know what that is. That you'll typically get that from your customs broker, like this guy here. He knows how to do that. Call your customs broker, and they can supply that 3461. I'm going to move past this. This is something that we at ABC put in place because we've had some problems in the past where we have to talk to the FDA about your product. And what happens is, unless you authorize us to do that, they won't talk to us. So we typically get our clients to sign this, just giving us authorization to speak to the FDA. It makes it a lot simpler and helps us expedite the analysis, which you don't really need to be involved in. This is an import sampling certificate, just stating by you, the importer, that this is the only time you're having this product sampled, the first and only time. And if for some reason we need to sample it again, then you would put, this is the second time we're having it sampled. FDA has us do this because a lot of people were lab shopping until they got the kind of results that they wanted. You might send your product to one lab, you get a positive result. Well, I don't want to report that, let me go to another lab. And so this helps protect you from the FDA scrutinizing your results. Again, like I said before, the importer has ultimate responsibility for the results of a third-party laboratory's report. And this is an importer's statement, which is required in our packet to the FDA, that just says, yes, you have read the analysis, you have read our document, our packet, and it is a packet. It's not just an analysis. It's a packet, and that you have reviewed the packet and have accepted it to be delivered to the FDA for review so that we can get your product released. This is actually June 2010. I had a February 2011 showing the number of refusals of various products. In February, because I'd rather just tell you, February 2011, there were 211 seafood products that were refused by the FDA, and all for various reasons. This new initiative, this new food safety initiative, and I think a lot of what you guys are going to find yourselves getting involved with is that this third-party accreditation, getting your suppliers, getting your overseas suppliers certified prior to sending things to the U.S. is going to save a lot of this refusal problem. Having certified third-party auditors, certified accredited laboratories, all that's going to be worked out, and if you saw the timeline for that is 2 years, Dominic? 2 years for accreditation for third-party laboratories and auditors. Is that correct? Okay. So that's going to change the way things are done, and I think it could be a lot simpler going forward than it is today once you get certified suppliers in place. All right, so I'm going to turn this back over to Peter. Thank you. If you have any questions.
All right, so we mentioned the words detention without physical examination, DWPE, a few times. That's what the FDA calls it. Your cargo arrives, it's put on hold or detained by the FDA, even if it's cleared U.S. Customs. Remember, Customs clears everything. You have to get their clearance first. It doesn't mean your cargo is released. For food products, especially seafood products, you need the FDA clearance as well. All right, so what is DWPE? For some reason, FDA collects information all the time about products from all over the world, especially seafood products, and has a huge database of information. Occasionally, they issue an import alert, and they say, for whatever reason, we've determined that this particular product from this particular country is subject to extra scrutiny. We want to take our own sample, says the FDA, or we at least want the third-party sampler to send us a sample after it's arrived in the United States to prove to us that there's nothing wrong with it. It's not misbranded, it's not adulterated. A typical import alert is the one I brought with me. I'll distribute it to you. Import Alert 1681, issued late last year. Detention without physical examination of seafood products due to the presence of salmonella. And the charge, as they call it, is the article is subject to refusal of admission in that the product appears to contain Nella, a poisonous and deleterious substance which may render it injurious to health, and the charge is, of course, adulteration. So that instructions from FDA headquarters goes to the field offices, all the ports around the United States, and basically will say something like this. All FDA offices are required to detain without physical examination all seafood products due to salmonella contaminated from specific manufacturers or shippers. These following pages list those manufacturers or shippers. And maybe you think, oh, that must be just China. No, or Mexico, or Canada. It's from countries all over the world that get added to this list. And if your name is on there, if you're on the import alert list, your product will automatically be detained, and then you have to prove to the FDA that it's safe. So this is a typical import alert with a typical kind of information, which, Dean, if you just pass to the front row and I can distribute it around. Okay. Here's another one. You know, the melamine that was discussed earlier was pretty serious. All right, here's the FDA procedures. If you want to write it down, or if you ask me later, give me your business card, I'll email you the procedures, how to get off the import alert list. It's pretty significant. Basically, though, what you want to do is provide to the FDA, actually Dominic's office, the customs entry forms in the United States, the commercial invoice, the packing list, the bill of lading, and then, and this is an actual quote from an FDA letter, that I do a lot of this, so I'll read it to you. In order for FDA to consider removing a firm and or product from detention without physical examination, the FDA must have evidence which establishes the conditions that gave rise to the apparent violation have been resolved, and which give FDA confidence that future entries will be in compliance with the Act. What does that mean? That means you need to hire a third-party food testing laboratory. You know, whether it's ABC or another one, ABC is a good one, they're right here. If you can do that, and 5 successive shipments are proven to be what they call clean, then you can submit your application to the FDA, and hopefully within weeks or months, you'll get off the FDA import alert list, and there won't be any more automatic detentions of your imported cargo. So that's how it really works, and it works effectively. As Dominic might tell you if he got up here, they receive hundreds, I don't know, maybe it's thousands of requests a year for companies to get off the import alert lists. And it doesn't mean that they can immediately review your submission and give you an answer. Okay. What happens if you're a seafood importer, it's fresh seafood, you need to get it in, the FDA says, hold it, we need to test it first, and we'll get back to you with our test. If it's fresh food, you need to move that food, right? So you said, you know what, I know, I'm the importer, I know it's good. I've been doing business with my exporter in China, Thailand, India for years. I know there's nothing wrong with this product. I'm going to distribute it, and I'll wait for the FDA then later on to tell me there's nothing wrong with it. No harm, no foul. Well, once in a while, that doesn't work. The FDA tests your product, they find there is something wrong with it, and you've already distributed it, you can't get it back. You cannot redeliver it back to the FDA or U.S. Customs. The FDA doesn't like that. FDA tells U.S. Customs what happened. Customs will send you what they call a liquidated damages claim. It's a penalty for 3 times the value of your merchandise. So if you brought in $100,000 of seafood and you didn't redeliver it after the FDA tested it, or FDA told you to hold it and you didn't hold it, that's a violation. And therefore you'll get 3 times the value, $300,000 penalty from U.S. Customs. And that, of course, will go against your import bond. The fault is always the importer. That's always the target by the FDA under Customs. So if you brought in merchandise, it's been detained, it's been tested, the FDA decides it's not good enough, it's adulterated, misbranded, it's refused, you have two legitimate options. You either destroy it, proof of destruction has to be provided to the FDA, or you export it within 90 days of being notified, and that proof of exportation must be provided to U.S. Customs. If you don't destroy it under FDA supervision or export the merchandise under Customs approval, you will automatically get a penalty for, as I said, 3 times the value of your imported merchandise. That could be a lot of money. This is some of the regulations that Customs deals with. This is what it looks like. Import bonds typically are $50,000 or $75,000. They can be a lot higher if you're a larger company. And the language on the Customs notice of penalty or liquidated damages incurred and demand for payment will be a failure to export or destroy subject merchandise in accordance with the terms and conditions of the importation and entry bond. You didn't do what you're legally obligated to do after that adulterated and misbranded merchandise entered the United States, and you're going to pay the price for it. If this is not satisfied, then U.S. Customs, of course, refers the case to the Department of Justice, and you have a case United States versus U.S. importer. Not something you want. So, in order to avoid that litigation, there is an administrative process internal to Customs. Just because you get a penalty notice doesn't mean you pay it. One of Quinter's rules is don't pay the government. Anybody ever get a speeding ticket? Okay, I got a speeding ticket. Do you think I just pull out my paycheck, my checkbook? I have to get it for my wife, of course. But do you think I just send the check to the government? No. I hire a traffic lawyer, and he fights it for me. It's the same thing here. You have an administrative process. If a liquidated damages claim or penalty is issued to you for 3 times the value, why pay the government $300,000? File a letter called the petition with U.S. Customs, Fines, Penalties, and Forfeitures Office, and explain all the circumstances, add what they call mitigating factors, and request that the penalty be canceled or at least mitigated or reduced to something that seems more reasonable. You can have a face-to-face meeting with Customs and Border Protection, and you can always just follow up with a telephonic call. What's really important to know, if it's an FDA refusal, Customs does make the decision, but Customs always has to get the recommendation from the FDA. So, and Customs, here's the key thing, Customs always accepts the recommendation of the FDA. So in effect, FDA is making the decision. So if you have a problem of this kind, you get a notice from Customs, you file your petition with Customs, you know you need to talk to the FDA compliance officer. And that's the key, I think, in getting these mitigated from $300,000 to hopefully, first a violation, maybe it's $1,000. Second violation, maybe it's $20,000. It depends. Each port is a little different. And it depends upon the nature of the violation, too. It may be that a petition doesn't even work. You're out of luck. SOL. That means $300,000 is what you're going to pay the government. Okay. All right, there's a new import alert. Do you want to mention this one? Okay. So I just want to say regarding import alerts, make sure you're not on them. Make sure you're not doing business with anybody who's on an import alert. If some company or some product is subject to an import alert, there is a process to get the company off of that import alert. You should follow that. If for some reason you have some detained cargo there's a process to challenge that detention. If the cargo, seafood, has been refused, legally you're obligated to either export or destroy it. If you don't do that timely and you get a penalty notice, there's an opportunity to file the petition with the government to reduce the amount of that penalty that you ultimately pay to the government. So I'll turn that over to Dean regarding this new import alert.
Yeah, this is just a quick note because we've been talking about adulteration or misbranding, but HACCP is another reason that you see things get detained. HACCP of foreign facilities. That's their good manufacturing practices, so forth. So this is import alert that's fairly new, 99-32, and this is saying that your foreign facility is not following good manufacturing practices, or they have a suspicion that they're not doing that. And what you'll find in the new law, and I think he talked about Section 306. What's going to happen is now if you fall under, if you as a facility or your supplier falls into this 9932, the FDA now is going to want to go out and inspect your facility, and you're going to have to let them come in. So foreign facilities on this import alert, it's going to be very difficult to get off until an FDA inspection is done of your facility to verify that it has been cleaned up, whatever the issue was has been cleaned up, and that you can prove it through your HACCP program and through your GMPs.
You know, we forgot to mention, because it's so fundamental, every company overseas and in the United States that packs, ships, transports food must be registered with the FDA, whether it's a U.S. company or a foreign company shipping to a U.S. company. That is an automatic. So if you haven't registered, please register before you ship any product to the United States. And as I mentioned to you earlier, there are hundreds of thousands of those companies around the world which have registered, are in the FDA database. So Tom, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just very quickly about this import alert. The import alert was historic in its nature in terms of getting implemented. The fact that we were going to go over there, we asked to go over there, we got refused inspection, and never had the ability under FSMA yet to place somebody on an import alert. The problem came from the fact that as a low-acid canned food requirement, you have to submit a process with the agency. The fact that we couldn't validate that process was in effect led to the appearance of a violation, and therefore the ability for us to put it on an import alert. So that was the basis behind that. This new law that Dean also mentioned is now we don't have to have that. We don't have to have a link with low-acid canned food. It's any refusal or any delay. So even if you're not ready to accept us to come in and ask for us to delay it a month, that gives us now the authority to say we believe that because of that delay, you have an appearance of manufacturing products that are in insanitary condition and therefore can result on an import alert. And if you're on import alert under this new authority, in order to get off it, you're going to have to reschedule an inspection. You're going to have to allow FDA to go out there. And with all of the work that we currently have, that could be a very long time. Right. So it's a big process.
It's true. The law is making a lot of changes. All right, so this is a blog website, Customs and International Trade Law. You can get free updates on customs, FDA, NOAA, which is National Marine Fisheries Service. Just put in your email address. All right, so you've seen or heard from the government. You've heard from a lawyer. Everybody wants to hear from a lawyer, right? You've heard from a food testing company. What you really want to hear from is an importer. And one of the largest importers of seafood in the United States is Pescanova. I'm very fortunate to see, and you'll be soon hear from the CEO of Pescanova. So Domingo, it's all yours.
All right. We're in here somewhere. Oh, right there. Perfect. But you know what, I'm going to need this too, because I have some of my notes on it. So. All right, well, thanks very much, and thanks for the intro, Peter, so I hope I don't disappoint too much. But anyway, I thought the idea of the presentation a little bit was to discuss, well, what does the industry think about this? What's the importer? What our concerns are? you know, we have a lot of them, as you could probably imagine, and you sitting there in the industry probably feel the same way. First and foremost, I'll give you a brief introduction of Pescanova, if you know, just a couple minutes here. We're pretty much a worldwide company. We're headquartered in Spain. We are a publicly traded company in Spain with over $2 billion in worldwide revenue. Makes us one of the larger seafood holdings in the world. As you see, everything in red are the countries that we currently operate in. We were founded in 1960. Like I said, one of the current largest holding companies. Besides having a large fishing fleet, about 125 vessels worldwide, we also have a little over 25,000 acres under aquaculture cultivation. That's generally shrimp, salmon, and turbot. We're a vertically integrated company. We're in fishing, harvesting. We go everything back to our feed mill, to our processing facilities. The picture you see there is one of our newest facilities in Nicaragua for shrimp. We are very much a sustainability-focused company. We believe that without a sustainability focus, we put the future of our business in jeopardy. And our challenge currently includes providing the most cost-effective protein for growing per capita consumption of seafood in the world, and at the same time, investing in technological advancements to provide for a sustainable and environmentally friendly resource. We're very much big fans of best aquaculture practices and traceability. We sit on the board of the Global Aquaculture Alliance. All of our centers are ACC certified. We're very much a socially and environmentally responsible firm. We invest heavily in the social infrastructures of our communities. We provide free health care and schooling to communities in the middle of nowhere that otherwise would have nothing. That's a little bit of Pescanova. So if we take a step back and take a look at, well, what are FDA's expectations in this law? And this is really taken directly from FDA's website. And you can see it's generally a preventive system with new authorities, risk-based standards, new tools, an integrated national food safety system. So if we look at the industry's expectations, well, if I scroll through this, you're going to see they're identical slides. We have the same exact expectations. However, there's only one big difference. This is, can we comply without going out of business? There's a lot of unanswered questions regarding the law. How will this affect? The jury is still out, as you can tell from the previous presentations. And how safe is our imported seafood now? I would certainly make the argument that seafood is probably one of the safest proteins out there. So why do we need more regulation to control it? In the past, FDA has concentrated on importers and processors. Will this continue? Will we involve other members of the supply chain like retailers, trucking companies, et cetera? And the other big question, and I think that's become clear through Dominic's presentation, will FDA have the resources to fulfill the requirements of this act? It's not clear right now. Currently, there's no money allocated towards it, and it's a fairly large challenge. Now, we have some outlooks on FSMA and some negatives and positives. What we feel the negatives are is a lot more inspection, foreign authorities, third parties, buyer audits. Who are going to do these inspections? Who are the third parties who are going to perform the audits? We're going to have to come up with food safety or food export certificates and the additional record keeping for high-risk foods. Of course, we do feel there's some potential positives here. It's a prevention system versus a reactive system. It's risk-based, which means it's an expedited importation process for those importers who have a track record and who have been cooperating with FDA for qualified importers for a long time. So that's a positive. But of course, there's a lot of things associated with the law, but we generally have boiled it down to what we feel are the 4 top concerns for the industry. And I'll go through these one by one. I'll explain to you what the concern is, why we feel it's a concern, and provide you a real-world example of something that Pescanova has experienced. The first concern is record access. Or the first, I should say, I'm sorry, give me a moment here, I got to get to my notes. The first concern is the record access. FDA will have access to all of our records, including food safety plans, and the firms will be required to keep documenting implementation of our plans. Why is this a concern? Because we're generally talking about giving public access to private information. So that generally means we're going to have to handle over maybe some confidential information. Who gets to see this information? And I'll give you an example. Recently, we had an FDA audit in our company where they came to see about some product that was distributed that needed to be recalled, et cetera. And they also asked us for some sensitive financial information. What were our sales numbers, our margins, costs? Are we required to hand that over? Is that going to become private domain? Public domain? So that's a concern. And obviously someone like us at Pescanova, we sometimes handle a lot of very confidential R&D information from customers we work with, packaging, different formulations with marinating products and things like that. And I'm sure that none of our customers are going to be very happy with us if we share all that kind of information with FDA without their authority. So I think there's a lot more questions here than answers, but you can certainly see where the industry could have a concern here, and having some of our competitors take a look at what we're doing. Our second major concern, and this is a big one, and that is expanded administrative detention, as has been discussed here. FSMA provides FDA with a more flexible standard for administratively detaining products that are potentially in violation of the law. And well, why is this a problem? Well, obviously, as you've seen, the criteria to detain a shipment has been relaxed. So we would argue, wouldn't it be fair to say the industry is considered innocent before being proven guilty, before we go into these laws? But, it's a very complicated law. And when you throw in other things like the Lacey Act, this has the ingredients to be a very expensive, perfect storm of laws. But communication and transparency are the key to this concern in working with FDA. The industry must be proactive here. If we get passive, something what I'm about to show you could happen to you. Let me provide you an example. I'm going to show you a video which was recently aired by a news station in Miami about a case we were involved with. And it shows how miscommunication and failure to maintain a dialogue with the proper agencies could get you into hot water really quick. And I'm sorry, technically we had some issues, so I have to kind of switch here to be able to show you this. This was aired about a month ago by the NBC affiliate in Miami. It is. And unfortunately, do I have... Hey, hold on a second. Well, I think volume would be good. Hold on a second. Yep. Got it. Yeah, I got it.
Midtown Miami, they serve only food that has limited impact. Restaurant in Midtown Miami.
Can everyone hear that?
At Sustain Restaurant in Midtown Miami, they serve only food that has limited impact on the environment. Florida organic beef, local veggies, fish that's regional and plentiful. But what you won't find on the menu here at Sustain, along with a lot of other things, is Chilean sea bass.
Chilean sea bass is overfished, overplundered. We would never serve it here.
It was broken down in the vicinity of Third Island.
You're looking at rare video of what's called a pirate ship, boarded by international regulators, trying to stop the illegal fishing of this, Chilean sea bass, a black market of $200 million a year. These lucrative, strange-looking fish are actually called Patagonian toothfish. They live in icy southern waters, thousands of feet deep, and reproduce slowly. But oh, it tastes so good to seafood lovers. How about you?
No, I don't. In fact, I won't actually go into a restaurant or patronize a place and serve serious.
Miami's Tom Watts Fitzgerald leads the largest team of environmental federal prosecutors in America, maybe the world, outside the Justice Department headquarters. And these photos show one of 23 actions taken by the feds since 2000 against illegally imported Chilean sea bass. The Coral Gables importer was fined more than $10 million solely because the company's paperwork was 3 weeks late.
It's a huge ocean, and there are very few patrol assets to deal with the number of pirate vessels that are out there.
So treaties require legal fishing ships to have tracking devices on board and a complex paper trail that must follow the fish from the hook to the plate. It's working. UN reports show that in 1997, 75% of Chilean sea bass was caught illegally. Last year, about 15%. In fact, as more restaurants take Chilean sea bass off the menu, fishermen are less likely to go fish it. Jeff Burnside, NBC Miami.
Is everyone able to hear that okay? More or less. I'm going to get back to the F5 you said? Yes. Oops. I'll get through this, hold on. Okay, so this was the piece on, I hope everyone heard that one okay, but when I first saw this piece, I could tell you, I mean, there's so many inaccuracies to this piece, I almost jumped out of my sofa when I was reading it and wanted to start hitting people. But there's a lot of inaccuracies, but clearly, if you're in the industry and know anything about sea bass, this will make your hair stand up. First and foremost, as opposed to what the piece claims, if there's ever been a model for sustaining a sustainable fishery and managing it well, it's been Patagonian toothfish, a very stable fishery for the last 15 years. Pescanova is one of the initial companies who saw this treaty go in place. And we really pushed it because we want to protect our resource. And as a result, it's been one of the most stable fisheries over the last 15 years, and I think become a model for how we should manage our fisheries around the world. Now, what happened in this case was in November of 2009, we brought in 4 container loads of Patagonian toothfish from an affiliate of ours in Argentina. And due to some poor communication and some technical difficulties with the paperwork, we failed to submit a 1-page document to NOAA in time. And before we were able to address the issue with NOAA, it was handed over to a very aggressive prosecutor inside the Justice Department in South Florida. And although we were finally able to provide the correct paperwork 30 days late, and the fish was perfectly legal, communication breakdown with NOAA caused us to deal with the prosecutor, who does, by the way, does not patronize restaurants who serve sea bass. But in the end, it was the government, or NOAA, who sold off our confiscated fish to a competitor. So the lesson here is it's okay to confiscate legally caught fish, just don't patronize the restaurants. So even NOAA had no reason to believe that this fish was illegal, and in the end, a civil paperwork violation was criminalized. 18 months later of litigation, we were fined $10,000 in legal fees, which was a legal minimum, and no probation from the judge. But sadly enough, we did lose all of our fish. And by the way, the fine was $10,000, not $10 million as the piece showed. And I wonder how much of an error that was on behalf of the news station. But we did lose a fish, and that's mainly because that was falling under the discretion of the Lacey Act, which gave the prosecutor that discretion to stay with the fish. I would love to tell you otherwise, but the bottom line here is it was nobody else's fault but our own. We failed to maintain a good communication with NOAA, open, transparent, and solve the problem when it happened. But I am proud to say that Pescanova maintains a very good relationship with FDA, and we've had some for a very long time. And I think I could safely say that when FDA looks at us, they look at us as a partner in the efforts to push forward this FSMA. And that's the type of partnership that we would have definitely benefited from with NOAA in this case. But you can clearly see where the expanded administrative detention kind of gets the concern a little bit. But again, I think that's fought with transparency and engaging the agencies to make sure it doesn't get out of control before you bring it back under control. Our third concern is the increased foreign inspection that was also discussed previously. Like he said, I think you're at 600 inspections, need to double that every year. Of course, the concern here is, why is that a concern? Is, well, who's going to do these inspections? Is it going to be by third parties? Is it going to be by the FDA? Our issue here is HACCP was implemented for a lot of these reasons, to try to eliminate or lower the amount of inspection. So there's a lot of questions as to, are we going to maintain the HACCP program in place? Is it going to be in addition to the HACCP program? And this could get expensive really quickly. And the fourth concern that we have here is regarding traceability, about putting a system in place that will work both domestic and international food. Why is this a concern? A traceability system could be very expensive. And quite frankly, from our perspective as Pescanova and as an industry, we're not quite sure this requires regulatory control or FDA's involvement, and only for one reason is traceability systems are already in place. And they're mandated by our customers, not really FDA. And we have a lot of very sophisticated traceability systems in place that serves the need of our customers. So if we were have to have two systems in place working parallel with whatever FDA puts in place, you know, in short, you know, that could be very expensive and inefficient to a system that currently works really well. And it only works really well because it's not demanded by anyone else other than our customers. And that's the most effective way to put an industry in, or at least the most effective way to put traceability in place. So I think our concern here is we want to make sure that FDA remains flexible in using the systems that are currently in place that could be quite sophisticated, especially for a company like us, like Pescanova, that we're vertically integrated. We can do traceability all the way back to the origin. The question is going to be how do you get the smaller importers and the smaller producers into the same type of system? That's the traceability. So again, in summary, these are our four kind of main points. The record access concern, the expanded detention, increased foreign expansion, and traceability. But after all the dust settles, is our seafood going to be any safer? And what can the industry do to improve the implementation of SMA? And the next thing you're going to see here is, you know, I chose the words carefully because I think they're important. But the industry must be willing accomplices. And the accomplices is a key word there. We must collaborate with the agencies to ensure the safety of our seafood. This allows for transparency, and more importantly, it demands accountability. What happened to us in the case of NOAA, since we were sort of removed from that relationship with NOAA, we lost our right to be to hold NOAA accountable, because part of the paperwork violations that were spoken of were partly NOAA's fault. So if we're not engaged with the agencies, if we're not engaged with FDA or with NOAA or with Customs, you know, we're going to lose the transparency, and then not only as the private industry but also as taxpayers, we're going to lose the ability to demand accountability from those who are enforcing the laws on us. But most important, at the end of the day, we do this because it's good business. If we can protect our seafood safely, efficiently, at the end of the day, the number one reason to get involved and to collaborate is because it is good business. And that's it. So we'll be open for questions.
So we left 10 to 15 minutes remaining for questions. If you have a loud voice, speak up. If not, there's a microphone in the middle of the room. Who's going to pose the first question? Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if there's some verification system that's required now under this new law where perhaps the factories have to test for salmonella or E. coli and show the results of those tests.
Okay, I'll let Dominic, you want to address that? Regarding verification.
There is a process on high-risk food, so the agency is required.
Yeah, I don't think they're on.
Talking to me. Is that on?
The agency has to. Yeah, it's on. The agency has to identify high-risk commodities, and you're going to have to implement a preventive action to certify that those products are in compliance with the law. So that could mean a number of things, and we're trying to figure out what that's actually going to mean. Does it mean the facility is in compliance or the products associated with them? And that the certification of a product may be a third party. So part of that third party audit process that I talked about would be the testing of commodities for certain risks, providing us a certificate that it's in compliance, and the importer is going to be responsible to ensure the safety of food coming across. So they're going to have to play a major role along the entire supply chain. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier is how far along that supply chain. Well, under Good Importer Practices, which was designed several years ago under the Import Action Safety Plan with the 10 agencies, it kind of designed an importer program to look at not only building a relationship, but not only where you're getting the products from, but where are the products going and what is the end results associated with them. So it's an entire supply chain built. But to answer your question specifically, yeah, depending upon what that commodity is, we are going to have to put in place and provide guidance on what you're going to have to do.
I think it's an incredibly good question. I think the law is very vague on it. We'll see what happens in the next 18 months or 2 years. To have a verification process for, I don't know, 300,000 different food facilities around the world, very difficult. You know, we talked about earlier, 20 million entry lines of seafood into the United States every year. And maybe the FDA examines 2% of that. I'm no math major. Is that 400,000 shipments? That's a heck of a lot of shipments to examine. And that's if they only examine 2%. How do you target that 2%? And that's part of what this law will hopefully address, to help the FDA focus on which 2% to examine.
And I would suggest that if you're going to look at new suppliers, develop a checklist of ask these questions and develop a series of questions. Can you provide a HACCP plan? Do you have good manufacturing practices in place, and so on and so forth? And there's also going to be a list of, depending on the product, through the BAP, which we talked about a little bit, BAP, which is the best aquaculture practices, they have a checklist of laboratory analysis that are done, and the frequency of those laboratory tests being done on a facility. So again, you can contact the GAA and BAP, and they'll also help you with that.
Yeah, the law also says
identify suppliers.
The law also says that the agency has to consider the size of the importer, the products being imported, what the risks are associated with them, so that we have to build something based upon what the products that are being imported into the country.
Okay. Another question? Yes, sir.
Who will go into the detention list if something is found wrong, the exporter or the processing facility?
So let me explain a little bit about that DWPE. First of all, the detention without physical exam, in order to be placed on a DWP, there needs to be evidence. We need some kind of evidence. You just can't be placed on there just for the appearance. And a lot of people think that that appearance means that you don't need a violation to be on that list. We found something in the past that says every future shipment, or what we believe future shipments, have the appearance of the violation. So we already have the evidence to support it. It could be anyone along that supply chain. So if we identify,
all of them.
or all of it, or it could be a country. And it's dependent upon the evidence that we have. So, for instance, if it's an insanitary condition and we believe that we did a GMP inspection and found violations, in order to get off that import alert, you would have to show that your facility is clean. And in order to get off, you would have to meet that requirement that got put on, as Peter mentioned during his presentation. So it could be anyone along the supply chain. We would link it most likely to the manufacturer. We would link it to the product. If we knew if the supplier or the importer, we could add that as well. Some of the issues in terms about traceability is sometimes we don't know where it came from. When Salmonella St. Paul happened with tomatoes, it was very hard to identify all the way back to the grower in that supply chain. And when we reported back to Congress and laid it out, it was actually determined that the people that sold or grew the product bought the product from somebody else and incorporated in there. So all of that played into the FSMA and some of the traceability requirements and so forth. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, a lot of times the FDA will take the information that was provided in the customs entry, and in the customs entry form will be a manufacturer's identification number, and they'll use that to put on the import alert list. But like Dominic said, it could be any company in the supply chain. So another question? There was this question in this area?
Did that answer?
So the question was for China to be removed from the automatic detention. Is it just 5 shipments that need to be clear?
So I think you're talking about Import Alert 16131, which is the antibiotics for seafood coming in from China? And the answer is no. There are certain requirements. I believe there's 3 of them within the Import Alert itself that talks about how to get off the Import Alert. One of them is 5 clean shipments. Second is making sure you meet the requirements of the exporting country. That means AQSIQ has to play a role, and they have to validate that you're in compliance with the law and you meet all those requirements. That information has to come back to the agency. We have to make sure that you are in compliance. So that Import Alert specifically identifies all the requirements that's needed to get off the Import Alert, and it's beyond the 5 shipments. So there's more requirements in that one.
Yeah, that reminds me of another takeaway from this. A lot of times the importers have a consultant or they try to do themselves to get off an Import Alert list, or the overseas supplier tries to get off the Import Alert list. And they submit the application to the FDA, and then 4 months later the FDA sends them a letter saying your application is incomplete, please send us additional information. And then you do that. When you go back, you're starting at the bottom again. It's a whole new beginning in the process. You're at the bottom of the pile. So submit your application for getting off an Import Alert list correctly, completely the first time. It'll save you a lot of hassle later on. Okay, more questions? This is your chance to get free answers from lawyers. How often does that happen? And government. So, sir in the back.
Hi, I'm Chris Rogers. I'm with NOAA. I'm the Chief of the Trade and Marine Stewardship Division in NOAA.
Great.
International Affairs. So I deal a lot with the import documentation program. I certainly agree with Mr. Moreira.
That's for me? Well, I guess I would answer the question first is I believe wholeheartedly that almost any endeavor can be handled better by the private sector than the public sector, without a doubt. But, you know, I think when it comes to traceability, I think what FDA's role should be in traceability is making sure that it's sort of like an audit process, making sure that you have to be, that your traceability program has to pass some sort of standards in an audit process. And whether, you know, it's sort of like, you know, sort of like a software system. You know, you know, if you're working on Windows or on Apple, I think everybody agree both Windows and Apple can both run Microsoft Office at this point. So if you can meet those standards, should pass. I think what the industry, at least where Pescanova would come from, is to say there shouldn't be a one worldwide system for traceability for everyone to try to mold to. You know, traceability for shrimp is a lot different than traceability for salmon. That could be for poultry or for beef. I think what the law should probably focus on, what are the minimum standards to be able to report traceability, and then it's up to the private industry or the private sector to say, well, we're meeting those minimum requirements. And as long as we meet those requirements, we pass. But it's a little bit, it's very concerning if there's going to be a worldwide global system just for traceability in place. I think there's just too many moving parts, too many different products. It'll be difficult to put everyone on the same standard.
You know, Domingo from my perspective, Domingo brought up a really good point. He talked about the laws that already exist. For example, the Bioterrorism Act of 2002 really talked about traceability, registering foreign food facilities, so we know where the food comes from, every company that touches food from the grower through the retailer is supposed to keep records in case there's some sort of a problem. The FDA can go to the end user and trace the food back to where it came from. The new law extends that even more further. So I really like Domingo's question at the end of his slides. It said, are we going to be safer? Is our seafood safer with this new law than before? I would answer the question, yes, but is it worth the cost? That's my question.
Right.
So,
and I think I also want to say that I think the traceability system should work, is that FDA should come into our office and say, we had this one lot of product that had a problem. Prove to me that you can trace this back where you bought it from.
Right.
And if I could meet it to put it up to Dominic's, minimums, and he's happy with it, that should be the goal.
And I think that, and I would think that that's probably, I mean, different sizes of companies, you can't, there has to be flexibility, and you have to meet those standards, and I think that's where we're looking at standardization of everything. But the one thing I do have to say in terms of whether the cost benefits the safety of seafood coming into the country or any other commodity, I would ask, and as a public health officer and as an agent with the Food and Drug Administration, I'd have to say, our key is public health. If the death of one individual could be linked to seafood, just think about whether it's going to be your son, your daughter, your mother, your family member. How you really can't put a price to that. And I think it's the obligation of everyone, whether it's industry or the government, to make it and put in systems in place to try to prevent the death of one individual. 3,000 deaths per year due to foodborne illnesses is, a major impact when it's you. So you can't put a price on that. And the safety of the public is and I know that there's business, but I think as a government, that's what we have to fight on. And I also think talking about one of the other concerns in terms of administrative detention, I think you'll find that that's going to come into play when there's an outbreak, and a major impact on an outbreak. It won't be that it's going to be abused by the agency, because we already had the ability to do it. We haven't done it in the past. This extends it a little bit more so that we have better controls in place, so if there is a potential outbreak, we can react to it in a more proactive way rather than what we have in the past. I think that's where you're going. I think the concerns are the same that Mr. Domingo has as well as the government, to make sure we don't abuse what's there. Because if you continue to do it over and over again, it's just an abuse of the laws that we have in place.
One of the new aspects of the law is they gave the authority to the FDA to have mandatory recalls of contaminated food. Can you imagine the FDA didn't even have that authority? There's contaminated food being distributed to restaurants and supermarkets where you and I shop and eat, and the FDA didn't even have the authority to say, no, take that back, get that off the shelf, destroy it. Well, obviously now they have the mandatory recall authority, so I'm very happy about that aspect. More, we have like maybe one or two questions left. I'll come right back to you. New questioner? Going once, going twice. Ma'am, up front, go ahead.
So I know this law is mainly for prevention, but I'm wondering also, does it increase the number of inspections at ports as
Let me give you my answer. Absolutely. I think, it's because I represent dozens of seafood importers, and they're seeing more examinations even before this law became in effect. And I think the law has done two things. It will not necessarily give funding under that law for enforcement, but the FDA is a much bigger agency than it was last year. It was bigger than the year it was 2 years ago. So you're seeing more FDA officers doing more examinations than ever before, which are resulting in more detentions, which are resulting in more refusals. That's my perspective. I don't know if Dominic's.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that what we're building is a higher risk commodities coming in. Historically, we have stopped, and I have to worry about all commodities coming into the country, not just seafood or food. But we have usually stopped where a human actually looks at the products. 89% of the 20.5 million lines that come in per year. That means that 19% of them are made preceded by our system, where we don't believe that there is a major concern. We need to change that number, because obviously, with our resources, we want to only target and only hold up those products that are at the highest risk. So I think the systems that we put in place, along with the law in terms of getting more information, getting more intelligence, doing part of the voluntary programs that are put in place, will expedite those that we don't have a concern with. We may look at more, but we can only look at what our resources allow us to look at in expediting shipments and looking at more things. Part of the refusal issues, and you have to understand that, you know, we talked about import alerts and the fact that we examine things on the, we don't examine things on the import alert. DWPE allows us to focus our resources elsewhere. So we already have that in place where we're saying, we don't want to look at those products that are on there because we already have control of them. You have to demonstrate to us to overcome. So it allows our resources to shift in terms of stopping those products. You prove to us that they're in compliance. We're going to look at something else. So there has to be that violation associated. So I don't know where it's going to go. I think it's going to be, I wouldn't say Peter's wrong because I kind of agree with him in fact of what we look at and how we look at it. I think it's just going to be a different type of looking. There's going to be a lot of auditing in the future. That might be at facilities, a lot more inspections in terms of, are you in compliance with the voluntary program? Do you have things set up? It could be making sure that the certificates that come along with the high-risk products are legitimate and not counterfeit. So there might be a different approach in the future, but that's, you know, we're not there yet in terms of what's expected.
You know, it's amazing. I work once in a while I work the Capitol Hill. You talk to your congressional representatives and you say to them, you know, FDA already examines 1 to 2% of imported food products, and they say, that's ridiculous. Only 1 or 2%? It should be 100%. How can we have food in this country without it being examined by the FDA? And they, of course, these congressional officials are wonderful people, but they've never been to a port. They've never seen, you know, 5,000 containers come off a ship, or, you know, freighters landing all night long at MI International Airport, or JFK, or LAX. So getting the Hill to think what we all know in the industry to be reality is something it's interesting to experience. So last question, burning question from anybody? All right, so we're going to stay up afterwards. So Domenic, thank you very much. Domingo and Dean and Peter Quinter, come visit us at booth 178. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in cufflinks, I have some Presidential Gold Seal cufflinks that'll be giving away later today. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time and attention.